Hello and welcome, wonderful people. This video entirely spoils Book 16 of Wings of Fire. I talk about all the secrets. So if you don't want to be spoiled and all that, leave, I guess. First things first. A very well job done, as always, to E.T. Sutherland. A really good book all around, as she always does. Even the most mediocre books that she's written are fantastic, and I love them. This book in particular is really good at filling in plot holes and gaps in story or character stuff, which I really appreciate. A quick list I came up with is first off, what happened to Umber and Sora, which is kind of obvious. What happened to Fathom's descendants, which this includes what happens to Blob, our Lord and Savior. One I was not expecting is it answers where Queen Monarch went, which is awesome. Very small detail, but it includes the fact that krakens or whatever undersea monsters actually exist and weren't just fun little things in the maps, which I think is really cool. It was the first book to implement like multi-hybrid dragons, like more than just two, with the Wild Wings, where there's so many hybrids and so many generations that they don't even fit into any singular tribe anymore, which I think is awesome. It answered why there are no Skywing Animus dragons, or like why they started to kill them off, which was hinted with all the dragons being so surprised that Peril was allowed to live. And it was talked about in Darkstalker with the Skywings, who mentioned that Animus magic or any dragons born with it were killed immediately. It actually answers that here, which I think is really interesting. It answers specifically who the mysterious Beryl was from the guide, which I think is really cool. A really big thing is it answered why the Leafwings and Beetlewings actually left for Pantala in the first place, which is really interesting. And obviously there are probably way more that I can't think off of the top of my head. However, this book, the ending, it really hurts. It leaves so many questions, literally just the epilogue pretty much, and it's kind of hard to process all of it. You know, all the queens vanishing into thin air is kind of a huge thing to just throw into the epilogue. And like, why is Kinkajou gone? I'm very confused. Also, some of the smaller questions that are just based off of what happened in this book, like where is Harmony going, what Mulberry and Umber are going to go up to, is really good, but it leaves a lot of questions. Anyway, I'm going to stop thinking about the book 17 anxiety for a little bit. Let's talk about some of the characters that are in this book. I think Umber's great. He, to me, feels like a mix of clay, turtle, and blue, which is a combination I think works really well. He's pretty clever, actually, and I really appreciate that his fighting skill was not, forgotten about. He is actually pretty competent because of his training with his siblings. It actually catapulted him from just a complete stranger who wasn't to be trusted into one of the most important dragons on the entire island immediately, which is super cool, even though he was completely foreign to all of it. It made him feel actually relevant to this place that he'd never been, which I really appreciate, which is kind of hard to do with some of these characters in new locations. Sora is great. She's really sassy, and I love it, like, so much. It was absolutely not what I expected, but it's great. She heals a lot from some of the initial trauma that she'd been dealing with, the whole reason she left in the first place. But it made sense in the context of the story. Although I have a feeling it's probably going to rear back up, because that sort of thing you don't just heal from overnight. Also, complete side note, but Aurora, the musical dragon that Sora and all the other dragons on the island really latch onto, really makes me think of Hatsune Miku for some reason. And that would make Sora a Miku fan,
You need to see a therapist.
which I don't know, it just feels really fitting to me. But that's neither here nor there. Then we have Mulberry, which is a really good first new character in this book. He's so kind, and a lot of his powers are quite interesting. I kind of figured he had some Nightwing in him, because there was no way that the Leaf Speak ability was diluted so much that he was able to feel the emotions of creatures. It just wouldn't make sense. The only other answer that I could think of is that he had some sort of animus magic about him, but that was quickly debunked. I honestly wish that he was in more of the book and didn't have to leave multiple times. Next, I want to talk about a character I immediately latched onto literally like 2 pages in. Platypus. Like, no joke, I immediately latched onto them. She is given the description by Sora as a grumpy and fierce version of Kinkajou, which absolutely, yes, completely, yes, I agree. It's like Peril and Kinkajou were merged together, and it's so awesome. And like later when Umber mentions magical death spit, Platypus immediately latched onto that and started using that, and it's perfect. It's awesome. It makes so much more sense, and I really latched onto her. She's so violent and enthusiastic and, awesome. Some people don't like this kind of character and feels like some of these books have been oversaturated by these sort of overdramatic characters, but I love it. All right, then we got Platypus's sister, Waka, I think is how you pronounce it. She's wonderful, although I do have less to say about her. She works a lot as the one who has to clean up after the ghost, which is Platypus, messing everything up. She's really sweet, and it's kind of unfortunate when she has to, or like when she's punished for a lot of things. Some of those memories that she had to relive was pretty sad. Side note, I really like how Platypus being treated as a ghost actually foreshadows the actual quote-unquote ghost, which Precipice shows up as later. Wallamy is interesting, though we don't know too much about them, and they are cute with Quokka, which is awesome. Crescent, while being a side character we didn't spend too much time with, the combination of dragons that they are really fascinates me, and I think it's really cool to see in canon with the Silkwing Nightwing. It's really interesting. Now, Monarch being involved in this book was a huge bomb when I was reading it. I was like, at first when I was reading it, I was like, oh, Tui made the same mistake of naming 2 characters the same thing. Literally, she does that in this book, naming 2 characters Glowworm. But then I read a little bit closer and I'm like, wait, no, Monarch is actually in this book. This is where Monarch went, which I think is super cool. I never would have guessed that this is where they went. And it's really sweet. She got to build a new life for herself away from Wasp and the hives and all that. Though it's sad that she has to run away in hiding yet again. It does set up for a really cool empowerment moment later, which is awesome. Dudong, I feel similarly to Wallamy, in which we don't get too much time with them, although it's really cute that he has an interest in Sora, it's just so cute. And I think it's really interesting to have him as original Mudwing royalty. It sets up for some cool thoughts that Tui could play around with later. Paua, I believe is how you pronounce it, is really cool. I really like the idea of a dragon who was supposed to be an animus, or like was expected to be one, just being completely normal. And also she gives me really big orca vibes, which is super cool. Same with another character I'm going to touch on in a second. And also, she's just a nurse, which is awesome. And she's a descendant of Waterfall, which I'm about to talk about, and Fathom, which is super cool. And of course, she has Blob. Really good stuff. Really good stuff. Now, Precipice is a very interesting character. Probably one of the most interesting characters in this book. She is probably the last Skywing Animus allowed to live that we know about, obviously. She's the one who enchanted the island so that nobody could leave. She was the one who made the sharp wings, the tiny metal dragons. And she was the one who set up the spell with the dragon eggs. And she was the one with the memory room. All really, really interesting things. At least I think she was the memory room. That could have been Waterfall. Speaking of Waterfall, we don't know a whole lot about her, but she is wonderful. And once again, she reminds me of Orca, and I love Orca so much. I legit have written 2 moderately length fan fictions about her, and I don't know. She's just really interesting to me, despite being, a psychopath murderer who crushes eggs. But anyway, back to Waterfall. Being an animus who actually got stuck on an island in a single place that used her powers to enhance or better the lives of the dragons who were stuck on the island is super wholesome and cool. Such a cool idea, and it's just really sweet. Honestly, the book would probably be less interesting if they all had to be in like huts instead of a really cool palace or whatever. And then obviously new characters, including Clink and 19, the sharp wings, the tiny little metal dragons. It's so cool. It's such a neat idea, and I'm honestly a little surprised it's the first time we've encountered quote-unquote robots or automatons in Wings of Fire. It's really cool. Unfortunately, while I do think it is pretty neat to have Beryl escape the Skywing Kingdom and actually being related to Scarlet, she does kind of fall into the, diet Scarlet, or like Scarlet Light. Like, she's just trying to be Scarlet, but a little bit less cruel and a little bit, kinder is not necessarily the right word, but more controlling and unstable, I guess, which is, surprising considering Scarlet. I do like her husband. Snakeroot is really cool. He gives me sort of Stone Mover, Hawthorne, just like really insane and secluded, which is really, really good for someone who delivers a very cryptic prophecy. It feels kind of weird when just a normal dragon has to spew that out like Moon does at the end of her book, but when a completely psycho dragon, recites it in front of a crowd, it makes a whole lot more sense, which really works in this book. Other characters I'm not going to spend too much time with, like Aurora Borealis, Taipan, Horizon, the King's Teeth group in general, which is quite funny considering how, incompetent they are. A lot of the past dragons from the flashbacks are super cool. Sorrel, Darkling, Bloodshed, all the queens, Magnolia, Euphoria, Retribution, Summit, Falcon, and all the other ones. It's really interesting to see all the past stuff where a lot of really important decisions were made that altered the futures of all the dragons later on. It's part of the reason why I love Darkstalker so much. It's like why the Nightwings are on the island and where the Animus line went from there. It's the same sort of idea, except it's almost more impactful because it considers like all the tribes, not just the Nightwings or the Sea Wings, but it considers the Beetle Wings, the Leaf Wings, the Sky Wings, because it was all the Skywing Queen's plot to kill her sister to gain control, which makes a whole lot of sense considering some of the themes that are in this and a lot of the other books. It's really cool. Now, moving on to the plot. I think the secrets are handled really, really well. I mentioned the memory room before, and it's a really neat concept. At first, I was a little scared that Tui was going to just do the same thing she did with book 15 and spend just way too long with visions and memories. Don't get me wrong, they're really good, but, when like a third of the book almost is taken up by just memories and flashbacks, it just kind of, I kind of check out a little bit. And I was worried the same thing was going to happen here, but it all kind of turned out all right. I really like the idea of the prisoners being tortured and forced to watch all these horrible memories that they've had to done as a punishment for their quote unquote crime. Something I especially like is when Mulberry forces more blood to come out of his wound or his cuts or whatever to change the vision. It really works for me. I think it's really cool. Sort of a positive negative sort of thing. Sora really fades in the background of this book, despite being the whole reason they're here in the first place. Umber goes to her for comfort or like ideas, or like if he needs to talk to someone about things. It's not like her presence isn't felt in the book, but she's not too involved in a lot of it until except for the beginning and ending, which is kind of unfortunate. But I think it works for this book. I really feel that Tui had fun writing this book. It was certainly a lot of fun reading it, and it was kind of nice to have a break in between books 15 and 16. It had a lot of time to think about what had happened, and then the guide also kind of helped to ease that time in between the really heavy story stuff. It really felt like the time skip was felt, despite the time skip being technically backwards, being all the way back to book 6, or like shortly after book 6, but I think it really worked. I read the book in 2 sessions, less than 24 hours. I read it the day before it came out, or that's when I started, because I got the book a day early, and I finished it the day it was quote unquote supposed to come out. And I got it signed, which is super cool. Alright, so I talked about the ending already, so I'm gonna shift around to where I think the next book could go. There is a possibility that she could, skip several years just to have Harmony as a POV, but to me that seems a little bit out there and would have a lot of complications. I could totally see having the next POV be one of the new characters that she introduced, like Platypus or Mulberry or Quokka. I could theoretically see Kinkajou being the next POV, considering she was specifically mentioned in the epilogue as having also disappeared, which is really confusing. I'm not quite sure yet. Obviously, there's the answer that Tui could just have a new character or side character that we haven't touched too much upon, which it would work fine. It's kind of what this book was. Umber wasn't a main character before, but now he is, which is great. There could totally be some human involvement past book 15, but I don't know exactly where it would be incorporated. It would probably take place later or in like another Legends book if he writes another one. Alright, I've been giving this a lot of praise so far, aside from little nitpicks, but there are some plot problems for me. A lot of the big problem with this one is, I think, pace. I feel like book 15 was worse, but 15 had other problems too. Granted, some of this problem could be just my reading palette changing as I get older and I read longer and denser books, but I feel like this book goes by really fast, and it does. While I do really like all the plot holes being filled and stuff, it feels like that's like all that happens, just stuff to answer other stuff, not new things that seem to be happening a whole lot, aside from, you know, the new places and some of the new characters that aren't involved in any of the other things, like all the wild wings that were born on the island that aren't related to Pyrean dragons. I think Tui could have probably dwelled a little bit more with some of the smaller moments, like even just a training session with Umber and the King's Teeth would be really, you know, fun and make the story feel like the time has actually passed instead of constantly skipping to the next moment every single time. Instead of just saying they trained until the end of the day, they could have actually slowed down and seen at least one of those training scenes would be fun, but that's okay. Another problem, the ending was really anticlimactic. At least book 15 had the visions going on that kind of upped the stakes a little bit, but here it ended really, really anticlimactic. Just, you know, Beryl being completely disarmed and sent to jail just, you know, through talking for the most part. They just kind of talked, and then, oh, the whole situation is over. The queen is dethroned and democracy is back, baby. Honestly, if it weren't for the epilogue and some of the little stuff with like Harmony and where Mulberry and Umber are going, it would be, you know, kind of said and done. This could have been kind of just a book by itself, maybe a side or Legends book, because it doesn't really leave a lot for what's going to happen next. Like everything on the island feels kind of solved and just kind of finished. Like a lot of the mysteries that were set up in this book were solved by the end of it, which is good for a standalone book. But considering this is supposed to be a part of the next arc, I don't know how smart of an idea that was to immediately answer all the questions, but that's okay. Tui can do whatever she wants, I guess. Not saying that I don't like the book, it's really good, but some of these plot issues just kind of stood out to me. Now, random thoughts time. I know that's kind of what this already was, but this is even more random thoughts time. First off, I love the consistency with the usage of the sleeping powder, considering Beryl's past with concocting poison for Scarlet. Why, oh why, is Kinkajou gone? I'm so confused. What's special about Kinkajou? Like literally all that was shown in the end is that all the queens were disappearing and then the egg was taken by some shadowy figure. So did another figure show up to take away glory or something? And then did Kinkajou chase that figure? What happened? Where did Kinkajou go? Why is she missing? This kind of adds to the idea of the next book being a Kinkajou POV. It'd be kind of interesting to see her in the next book. I'd really like that, I guess, but I don't know. It just feels weird for the time being. So, like the Dungeon Isle is it's just Australia, right? Like the palace is the opera house. It literally has like dingoes and kangaroos. And, you know, the fact that it's a prison island and that's what Australia used to be. And even, you know, on as simple as just how big of an island it is under another continent. It's just Australia. Although that does pose the question, do the dragons have like slightly Australian accents? That makes me wonder, does Wings of Fire have accents? I mean, probably. I just don't read it like that. Although I don't really read books like that typically, I just kind of read it as mostly one note unless it's specified otherwise, so that might just be a me thing. Lastly, I think it would be kind of cool to see how the dragons react with the lack of the queens. I think it would be cool to see if Tui decides to make their disappearance a little bit more drawn out, have maybe council-like systems, kind of like the Silk Wings and the Hive Wings have right now, in which elected dragons are chosen to take the place of the queens temporarily. Either that or just have another Hazel situation where the next in line just kind of temporarily takes control while the old queen is out of commission. Speaking of, why was Sequoia taken and not Hazel? I don't know. I thought Hazel was going to be the new queen of the Leaf Wings, but maybe that's just a me thing again. Anyway, these were my initial impressions from my first reading of the book. I'm sure I missed quite a few things. I've been talking a little bit with some other people about some of my thoughts and reading some of their thoughts. And honestly, I'd love to hear some of your guys' thoughts in the comments. I don't know, maybe let me know about some things I missed you feel passionately about, or some theories about what you think's gonna happen next. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Honestly, this review kind of turned into a rant, but that's, what I expected. That's okay. I haven't really done one of these before, or really anything like this before, so it's fine, I think. Anyways, I hope you have an amazing, thrilling, and blazing day, or night, or whenever you watch this. Subscribe if you want, I guess. If you want more of this kind of content, sure, I'd love to rant about more stuff and more of the Wings of Fire books. Okay, bye! Okay, future editing me here. I say certain words way more than I thought I did. Just so much. So, here's a counter of how many times I said some of these words. I guess I just can't talk.